Welcome, Venky. Thank you very much. Venky's a seasoned Agile coach and Australia's first certified LeSS trainer. And he's going to be giving us his thoughts on scaling Agile and possibly an introduction to large-scale Scrum. Thank you, Venky. Over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for the opportunity to speak at virtual meetings. It's always, I consider it as an honor when people invite others to share. And traveling between Melbourne and Perth since last, and also of course other cities, I'm finding it very hard to speak at meetups. I used to be a regular meetup speaker in Melbourne, but because of the travel, I'm kind of finding it very difficult. And this platform seems to provide alternate view for me to share as of my knowledge, specifically from the LeSS perspective. And also would like to thank all the participants, specifically in the zones who are staying late, specifically in Melbourne. And maybe people are joining from Sydney and other places. It's very late out there, so thank you so much for your commitment.
Sorry to interrupt, you actually got someone from Cambodia in the chat as well, so welcome, Dilip. It's nice to have someone from a long way away.
Hello, Dilip. Yeah, thank you for the commitment, and also for the next 45 minutes. I will try to share as much as possible. I tend to cover most of the topics in 3 days, and I have tried keeping it short, simple, to 45 minutes, and as much as possible. As we go, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. I will try to answer. If it takes too much of time, and if it needs a detailed discussion, maybe we might have to take offline, or I will try to give an answer, and we can move to the next one. We'll start with, right, so it's a quick intro. I live in Melbourne. Just like any other Agile practitioner, I have umpteen number of certifications. So I have a few of them, but specifically LeSS trainer is one of the things that stands out. I've put together an agenda here. I'll start with sharing some of the key ideas behind LeSS before moving to talk about LeSS frameworks, and then we can end with Q&A. Right. Some of the key ideas when it comes to LeSS is scaling creates complexity. And in the whole process of focusing on scaling, organizations are actually sacrificing agility and delivering value to the customer. And we believe that you can reduce the complexity by descaling. And LeSS is Scrum. These are the fundamental ideas behind how LeSS is designed. Basically, it's all about descaling and descaling the complexity. I'm just trying to see some of the screens here and use the mouse. All right, okay. I recently came across Kent Beck's article. I'm sure you might have heard about Kent Beck. And he talked about how scaling creates complexity, and I thought it's worthwhile to bring it here. If you're in front of your computer or phone, you should be able to see the screen. As this article clearly says that complexity is the enemy of scaling. And he identifies 4 distinct heads. He calls it as heads, which creates complexity. One is the state, the second one is interdependency, the third one is the uncertainty, And fourth is irreversibility. When he says states, that means that when we are dealing with a complex system, if you have multiple states, then each state would be doing something, and trying to figure out what's going on in each state and trying to coordinate between the states is what actually becomes impossible because of scaling. The interdependency between elements creates nonlinear responses, and again, it creates complexity. And we know that we are dealing with what is called as VUCA, right? The uncertainty is a common thing in this complex system. We are dealing with changing market conditions, and every day we have new technologies. Organizations cannot take a long time to think and make decisions. And from different directions, different forces are affecting the system. And it becomes unpredictable. The system never settles down. Especially in scaling, it becomes even more complex. And the fourth factor he talks about is the irreversibility. When the effects of decisions can't be predicted and they can't be easily undone, and decisions grow prohibitively expensive. So what I'm going to do, what I did was, after looking at this article, which talks about scaling, how scaling creates complexity, I started mapping what are the different factors in the organizations creates complexity in scaling. And then I have also started mapping how LeSS addresses these four states. I'm using this particular slide as an anchor in this talk. So as you can see here, in this slide, I have created this table. I have captured the four heads that are creating complexity on one side. And based on my past experience, I started looking at organizations and how these different heads create complexity due to scaling. I haven't actually gone in depth to do a one-on-one mapping, but I have kind of chunked several ideas together. But probably many of these can be mapped to each of these different states. But since I've already covered the four heads, the states, interdependencies, uncertainty, and irreversibility earlier, I'm not going to define them again or explain them. But typically in the organizations, the complexity gets created because of when we have siloed departments making decisions. So assume we have a user interface department, we have a separate, let us say, that middleware department, and you have a separate, let us say, that a release management department. So each of these departments, if they are working siloed way, and many of these departments are making their own decisions, and each of these decisions will impact someone else or some other department. And the other departments will never know why they are going through so much of pain, because they have no visibility that the decisions that are made by other siloed departments are actually impacting them. And so these siloed departments is one of the key things that creates complexity. We also have too many specialist roles. And when these specialist roles and individuals are incentivized for individual performance, so everyone is looking at how they can get the best performance rating, the best salary hike. And this behavior in turn creates its own challenges. And just assume that we are not dealing with 7 people, we are dealing with 10 people, 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people. So behavior is always a function of the environment. So the environment or the structure in the organizations, like the HR policies, KPIs, KRAs, this creates its own complexity. The third thing which many organizations and many frameworks they don't address is about defining the product. When the product development organizations, when they have not defined the product well, and especially if they are doing Agile and if they are trying to adopt Scrum in the organization, they will end up having multiple product owners, and each product owner will end up competing for the same set of resources. When I say resources here, it could be the budget, it could be the space, it could be availability to tools, so on and so forth. And this is something that I have seen as one of the most common problems in the organizations, where they have not defined what is the product. They would start I have come across organizations where they would just they'll be doing a 3 months work and they would call it as a product, but it will be part of a bigger product. And this kind of the environment where people are trying to do or doing projects and calling it as products is another thing that creates complexity. And of course, we know that if you are developing a feature and if you have too many handoff points, it automatically creates variable queues. I think this kind of maps to interdependencies, states, and uncertainty as well, because each and every agent in the handoff point behaves in a different way. They have their own speed, and variable queues as opposed to the predictable queues are more harmful, because you won't know until the system reaches utilization of 90%. And suddenly everyone is running around busy trying to make decisions. And again, it creates complexity. People have this 3 months, 6 months, yearly delivery, even though they are doing sprints or doing iterations. But I have come across organizations, especially large organizations, they don't deliver every sprint. They will create half-baked items, which in turn creates all sorts of debts, technical debt. The defects and everything keeps accumulating, and then they will, at the end, they will try to block a sprint or 2 sprints, trying to do something, trying to do what is called a hardening sprint, and trying to chunk out everything and then do releases. And such delivery lives, a lengthy delivery cycle inhibits frequent inspection and adaptation. When we are dealing with complex environment, frequent inspection adaptation, where we actually show the work to the customers and get feedback, never happens. Most of our org structures are all tailoristic org structures, where there is a separation of thinkers and doers. That means that if you have a project manager, or if you have someone like a release manager, they would do all sorts of planning, estimation, and everything, and the developers and the team members are mostly used only as order takers. This leads to underutilizing people's potential. Again, when we are not able to capture people's ability, and when we have separating thinkers and doers, it creates its own set of complexity. And as a consultant and a coach, when I go to organizations, the first thing they ask is, "Hey, Venky, can you tell me 10 best practices to do certain thing?" Which we have seen in organizations. When we are dealing with complex environment, every organization is different. As you might have seen, copy-paste culture is very popular nowadays. Just because a particular idea has worked in an organization, and just because the organization is being successful, people tend to correlate the framework adoption or the idea adoption to the company's success, and they start copy pasting without even thinking whether it is applicable to them or not. And they will try to copy the best practices, whether it's Amazon's and the two pizza team. Some of these things are popular, right? I'm just quoting that example. They will try to copy the practices from them, and they call it as a best practice. And as we know, practices are context dependent in a complex environment. It's always better for us to think what works for us and make conscious decisions rather than blindly copying ideas from other companies just because some popular company is using it. Again, this creates its own complexity. So again, I've just briefly mentioned some examples. I'm sure there could be hundreds of examples that you can bring from your own experiences. So in the next slide, I am showing, so how is LeSS associated and LeSS view on scaling? We talked about so far why scaling creates complexity and some examples about how complexity gets created in the organization. Now let's quickly look at LeSS view on scaling. LeSS says that instead of asking a question, how do you scale Agile? You should be asking a question that how do you descale an organization or reduce the complexity? And how do you do that? By applying the empirical process control. Let me repeat that again. The focus should not be on just how do I scale? The focus should be how do I descale the complex organizational structure and reduce the complexity? And the whole reason why we are trying to do the Agile way of working, adopting Scrum, is because we want the organization to be adaptable. We want to deliver highest value to the customer. And we should have that focus. And in order to achieve, we recommend applying the empirical process control, which is nothing but heart of Scrum. The inspect adapt cycles with transparency. As you can see on the left side, I have put a small image. That is the inspect adapt cycle and transparency, which is the empirical process control. So descaling the organizational complexity is the critical factor if you're adopting LeSS.
So that's a complicated, it's easy to say that, descale the organization, but because you don't mean make the organization smaller, you mean make the dependencies such that one team isn't tied up with all the other teams and they can do their own work without having to wait or having to talk even to other teams, so they can make progress on their own, even though there's multiple teams. You're looking at decoupling and removing dependencies. Is that what you're saying?
Spot on. The thing is, the organizations, there are large organizations, they are there, but what they miss out is they just focus on scaling. They just ask, okay, how many more teams we need to add? How many more people we need to add to this projects or product development, whatever you want to call. And in this whole process of scaling, they would be creating, as you mentioned, dependencies, handoff points, creating queues, creating variability, creating specialist roles. As we create more and more roles in the organization, we are taking away responsibility from the team. So the team starts becoming disengaged because now we have more and more rules. As you create more and more people, you need managers to look after them. As you create more and more managers, so manager starts managing the others, and the teams who are supposed to be closer to the customer starts becoming more further away from the customers. And finally, they end up becoming order takers and disengaged. And each and every structure that gets created in the organization will take a life on its own. When you hire managers, their lives starts depending on the organization. And after that, if you say that we need to change something, we don't want a particular structure, they will start resisting. So overall, we say that the structure creates culture in the organization. So it could be organizational structure, even the physical structure, the HR structures, the policies, KPIs, all these things actually starts creating more and more complex environment in the organization. And of course, in the context of agility and delivering value to the customer, the component teams, which I'm going to cover in one of the slides, creates its own set of problems. Did I answer your question, Ian?
Yeah, definitely. I was just confirming. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on, we looked at how scaling creates complexity. We looked at the 4 heads. We looked at some of the examples in the organizations, how these 4 heads and some of the structures creates complexity. We looked at how LeSS view on scaling, which is about descaling the complexity by applying empirical process control. Now I have done another attempt in trying to bring some of the LeSS ideas into the 4 heads and trying to map some of the how LeSS practices will help in reducing those complex issues. So this is very similar to the one what we saw earlier, but in the earlier slide I had mapped the 4 heads to the complex problems that we see in the organization. And in this, I'm using the same idea, but in this table I'm mapping how fewer roles and some of the ideas of LeSS actually helps in reducing the complexity. So LeSS is Scrum. There are 3 roles, just like in Scrum: product owner, Scrum Master, and we have team. In case of Scrum, they call it as dev team, but in LeSS, we have taken a deviation. We are just calling it as team. And we focus on defining the products, as discussed earlier. If you have not defined the products, then it creates its own dependencies, and we'll end up having multiple product owners trying to do the same thing, competing for resources and creating complexity. So in LeSS, we actually start asking, what is your product and how to define a product? So there is a whole lot of focus on identifying how to define whether it should be a narrow definition of a product and a broader definition of a product, and all those things. So we see that most of the challenges in the organization actually starts with not defining products. So LeSS addresses that very well. And as you mentioned earlier, the dependencies with teams is one of the key things. In the context of agility and value to the customer, LeSS recommends long-lived cross-functional customer-centric feature teams. And these teams take responsibility to deliver end-to-end features, reducing handoffs, and teams are self-managing teams. Again, this is to step away from the Tayloristic management and empowering the team. We highly recommend systems thinking as one of the key principles that the product development team needs to practice, whether it's during the planning, whether it is the reviews, retrospectives, and as such, while making any decisions. Again, this goes back to an example that I mentioned earlier, wherein nowadays organizations are going behind copy-paste cultures and celebrity endorsements, so on and so forth. And they will ask, tell me the best practices. We say that when dealing with complex product development, you might want to make decisions that helps your organization. And in order to do that, you might want to apply the ideas from systems thinking. Many a times, if you have read Peter Senge and other systems thinking principles, every solution that we recommend as coaches and consultants creates new set of problems separated by space and time. So to make effective decisions in the organization, systems thinking is essential. That is one thing we highly recommend, and it's covered deeply during the 3 days of training. Specifically in my training, I use systems modeling, also called as a causal loop modeling, as one of the key tools to teach various ideas and how to make effective decisions. And again, touching back on empirical process control, with frequent inspect adapt cycle, it helps in incremental delivery and quicker feedback loops. Again, this is one of the key essential foundation if we have to address the complexity, because we have uncertainty, but the uncertainty cannot be addressed by spending long time in planning, because we'll end up creating more and more buffers, because it becomes as the uncertainty increases, you start building more and more safety net around your planning estimations and etc. But instead, go with the optimistic planning and estimations, but frequently inspect adapt as quickly as possible. So these are some of the ideas that that are introduced in LeSS, which helps the organizations to arrest some of the complex problem that gets created because of the scaling. So this is, I kind of created a brief foundation about the ideas about why LeSS and LeSS view on scaling. Now actually let us look at what LeSS is about and what LeSS framework is and some history behind LeSS. As you can see in this picture, we have pictures of Buzz and Craig, co-inventors of LeSS. And on the top headline, you see that 600 experiments. So LeSS, large-scale Scrum, is created based on 600 experiments. On the left-hand corner, you see two books, Practices for Scaling Lean and Agile Development and Scaling Lean and Agile Development. These books were written, and these books actually capture all this, the 600 experiments. When Scrum was being adopted and Scrum became popular, a lot of organizations started applying Scrum in all contexts. And as we know, Scrum was designed mostly for one team, and it was never designed for multiple teams. And of course, people started coming up with ideas and modifying Scrum, customizing Scrum to scale into multiple environments. Scrum of Scrum is another example. It's not defined by Scrum, but people didn't know how do you manage dependencies, how do you coordinate multiple teams. So they said that, okay, let's create something called Scrum of Scrums, and started doing it. And I'm just lucky enough that I was working with Craig in Valtech during these experiments. And at that point of time, the approach that Craig took was that why can't we do experiments, and trying to bring various ideas in picture and try to scale Scrum, but without affecting Scrum. That's where the idea of experiments came into picture. So the various ideas from lean systems thinking, even theory of constraints, and so on and so forth. A lot of ideas were tried, and tried at various places, organizations, as you can see in this picture. In the at the center, I have given some of the companies where it was tried, and these ideas were captured, and we captured what works, what doesn't work in these two books. But many people have not read that book because it is like experiment. But I highly recommend those two books. It talks about how to do experiments as well. So LeSS was created after culmination of all these years of experience and 600 experiments. The framework was born in 2015. The framework took a shape. So if you are learning LeSS, if you are implementing LeSS, then you would be using these 600 experiments. So this picture, what you're seeing is the LeSS framework. There are two frameworks in LeSS. One is called LeSS, and the second one is called LeSS Huge. The picture what you're seeing is the LeSS, and we mostly talk about LeSS quite a bit, and I'm going to touch upon LeSS Huge in the end. They are very similar, but I'll explain LeSS Huge later. But I focus mostly on LeSS. So LeSS is Scrum, and as you can see, LeSS is set of rules combined with guides for applying Scrum in a multi-team context. It is not a framework that applies Scrum at team level and then adds additional scaling processes. Instead, it is Scrum scaled at all levels. Just like Scrum, as you can see in this diagram, there are 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and the team. You have sprint planning, you have daily scrums, you have sprint review, retrospective, and at the end of every sprint, you have potentially shippable product increment. So let's see Scrum. In LeSS, there is an overall retrospective as an added practice. But fundamentally, the spirit of Scrum, which is the empirical process control, the values and principles are preserved by adding few additional practices. That's all. So if you know Scrum well, then probably LeSS is extremely easy for you to learn, specifically from the practices perspective. But the value of LeSS comes when you understand the principles behind it and how to apply the principles while dealing with complex product development environment. So in this slide, I have just captured, summarized the few key areas, specifically the frequent delivery. That is, we recommend that that every sprint you need to create potentially shippable increment. We recommend that teams do their own coordination. As you can see in the image, there at the center there is some coordination, and there is an arrow connecting multiple teams. So we recommend the teams to do and come up with their own coordination technique, and we recommend decentralized coordination technique as opposed to centralized coordination technique. We want informal coordination rather than formal channels like setting up meetings, so on and so forth. We don't recommend someone as a mediator between teams to do the coordination activities. That is disempowering. So these are some of the ideas which actually helps in descaling, empowering the team. That's where the fewer handoff points comes into picture. Again, there are not so many ceremonies, very same set of events or ceremonies that Scrum recommends: daily Scrum, planning, reviews, and retros.
A quick question, Venky. Are you assuming in this setup that the teams are working on the same code base, so they're dependent on each other being ready to release one release, or are you talking the architecture allows you to do multiple separate releases?
Right. We recommend teams to be working on the main trunk rather than branches, so that every day they check the coding or as frequently as possible, and they integrate the code regularly, so that at the end of the sprint they are ready to release and ship the product or the set of features. So one of the key things that we have realized is that you cannot achieve the business agility or the organizational agility without the technical agility in place. So that's extremely critical. So I'm going to cover some of the technical practices in the end. Of course, these technical practices are already proven, but some of these things we have identified specifically and recommend them.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, Venky, quick question in the previous slide. On the business and organization agility perspective, how the LeSS teams connect with the businesses, with the other teams outside the technical teams in a LeSS way of operation?
See, there is no specific business team or technical team concept here, because they end up becoming component and specialized teams. LeSS recommends that the teams are supposed to be cross-functional feature teams who have the ability to do end-to-end customer-centric feature. So the team needs to have the skills to deliver the end-to-end thing, end-to-end feature. But coming back to answering your question about the business, again, most probably the only business representative could be the product owner. So the product owner has the product backlog. The product owner works with the team during the sprint planning. sets the vision, purpose, and talks about the priorities, and the teams in turn look at those priorities, and then they decide what they can do, what they can't do, and then they start building the code base. And during this process, if they have any dependencies and if they have to coordinate with any other teams, the team decides how they want to do it, how they want to do the coordination, who they want to talk to. But predominantly, they might end up needing some help, let us say, legal team. There could be one of the features during one of the sprints that might need some kind of a help from legal team. Then during the backlog refinement process, where they're actually planning for the next couple of sprints, they have identified that they need to maybe involve HR or legal team, and they would have informed them, and they will start inviting them when that particular feature, which needs legal or HR or any other business team, needs to be involved, and then they work during that sprint. Did I answer your question, Abdullah?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Venky.
No worries. Thank you. Moving on, the 10 principles are the key things. I just showed about the frameworks. So a framework is a set of practices. But the key strength, one of the key strengths is the 10 principles. We recommend that when we are dealing with a complex environment, the organization needs to make decision that works for them. And they need to build the capability within the organization to identify the wastes in the system. They need to make informed choices. They need to understand the effect of or the impact of the decisions they are making on the overall system. That's where the system thinking comes into picture. And we strongly highlight the queuing theory, as you can see on the left side on the top, because queues are one of the major challenges in product development. As you know, Scrum and LeSS, they're all product development framework. They are not organizational design, organizational development frameworks. So when we are dealing with products, we have product backlog, we have multiple teams. And if the teams don't know how to split the product backlog items, if they don't know how to create the flow, if they don't know how the variability in the queues impact the value delivery and the agility in the system, they struggle quite a bit, creating more and more complexity. And that's where queuing theory is highlighted. So if you attend one of my programs, spend nearly half a day specifically focusing on identification of queues and how queues impact the system and impact a variable queue, so on and so forth. Of course, if you are interested, you can dig deeper by reading Principles of Product Development book.
Venky.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, Venky, one of the best things about queues is they tell you where your bottlenecks are and therefore what's slowing you down. So they're very interesting to learn about. Absolutely.
Principles of Product Development, the book is a fantastic book if you're interested to know more. So the principles actually helps in making many decisions that are relevant to the organization rather than trying to copy paste. From the lean thinking perspective, of course, identification of wastes is one thing, but of course, we also bring the concept of perfection vision. One of the key things that drives the continuous improvement culture in the organization is to have such perfection vision. So perfection vision is covered as part of lean thinking. Another thing, we borrowed the idea from lean, and also the ideas from Toyota Production System, is the concept of managers as teachers. We want, in organizations, even though we are talking about the product development framework like Scrum and LeSS with only 3 roles, you will still end up having managers. How do you deal with managers who are running around trying to put pressure on people to get work done? And we say that if you are working in such an environment and trying to apply LeSS, then we recommend managers to become teachers and coaches. Again, some of these ideas are taken from Toyota Production System. Other ideas, other principles here: transparency, more with less, product focus, customer centricity. They are self-explanatory, and especially keeping the time in mind, I'm just focusing on some of the things that are rarely spoken in a product development scenario. Yeah, so we have LeSS framework. If you're learning LeSS, you will learn about these 10 principles. You'll learn about LeSS framework, how the practices are applied in a scaling environment, and you will also get access to the 600 experiments. The next 2 slides, I have just briefly tried capturing what each of these principles are. I will read it out for those people who may not be in front of the computer who might have just dialed in. Large-scale Scrum is Scrum, that is, it's not new and improved Scrum. Rather, LeSS is about figuring out how to apply the principles and elements and purpose of Scrum in large-scale context. Empirical process control, it's about inspection or adaptation of product, process, or design. Transparency, it's based on the tangible done items, short cycles working together, and we need to drive out the fear in the workplace. More with less means in empirical process control, more learning with less defined processes. In lean thinking, more value and less waste and overhead. In scaling, less roles and less artifacts and less special groups are needed. We recommend whole product focus. That means that we need to have one product backlog per product, and we need to have one product owner per product, and one potentially shippable product increment with one sprint, regardless if we are dealing with 3 teams or 33 teams. At the end of the day, customer want the product. They don't want the part of the product. Customer centricity, identification of value and waste in the eyes of paying the customer, focus on reducing the cycle time, increase the feedback loop with real customers. And everyone in the product development team understands how their work directly relates to and benefits paying customers. Continuous improvement towards perfection. We need to create and deliver a product all the time with no cost and no defects to the customer. And do humble and radical improvement experiments each sprint. Systems thinking. Another principle, one of the key principles. See, understand, and optimize the whole system, not the parts. Again, this goes back to the example that I mentioned earlier. If you have a separate UX and middleware team, and basically the component teams, specialized teams in the organization, they're all trying to optimize their own parts. You know, if you have a Java team, or if you have a UX team separated from the middleware team, then UX team will use their Java skills, and they will churn creating more and more screens, more and more JavaScript code, because they don't. They are incentivized for building more and more code and more screen, but they don't realize that just the screens are not going to add any value to the customer without the middleware and the database work. When you have a specialized and component teams, they are all actually optimizing the parts, not the whole. So we recommend to look at optimizing the whole. Use systems modeling, causal loop modeling to understand the system dynamics. And we say that local optimization is always suboptimal. So always avoid local optimization. Lean thinking, we need to create organizational system whose foundation is managers as teachers, where the managers actually teach system and lean thinking concepts to the team, so that the overall system is improved. Queuing theory, which we already covered. It's basically understand how queue works and apply the impact of the queues on WIP limits, multitasking, and the variability. So yeah, we cover during the LeSS courses, or if you're a LeSS practitioner, you will end up learning and having a deep knowledge in these areas. We take the product development very seriously, and we really, really want to add value to the customer. And we just don't focus on scaling, because scaling, in the whole process of scaling, people and organizations are forgetting the waste that they are creating. And in fact, they are also killing agility. And we say that the whole focus of what we are doing Scrum and Agile related work is we want the organization and the product development to be nimble and adaptable. And we need to build an ecosystem to support that. And without the knowledge of the principles that I spoke about, it's extremely hard for organizations in a complex environment to be agile. I will touch upon other key ideas as well. Again, literally there are another 50 or 60 ideas that I can talk about, because I'm trying to condense the key ideas in this 45-minute talk. So I've captured a few of them. The product ownership is something that is critical. This is, we talk about 5 relationships of a product owner. We know that in mostly the product owner will have relationship with the Scrum Master from coaching perspective and learning about Scrum perspective. Product owner will have relation with higher management because they are the investors. So product owner needs to be plugged in with them. Product owner will work with the teams that we know during the sprint planning, reviews, retrospectives. Product owner, of course, will work with end customers because they are the ones who are the end users. These are the 4 key relationships which mostly people know, but LeSS also recommends the 5th relationship, which is product owner needs to work in establishing relationship between the end customers and the team. What we found was in a scaled environment, when dealing with scaling with multiple teams, product owner starts becoming bottleneck. If you want to summarize and synthesize the product ownership role in Scrum, it is, there are 2 predominantly roles. One is prioritization and clarification. And what we realized was that clarification of items is the one thing that takes away too much of time in a scaled environment. It is prudent for product owners to start building that relationship between teams and customers, so that whenever there is anything related, any clarification needed, that product owner either don't have bandwidth or don't have the ability to answer, instead of playing the middleman or middlewoman's role of trying to get the answers from the customers and hand it over to the team. Product owners in LeSS should start building that relationship between the team and the customers. So that is something that we recommend in LeSS environment as the 5th relationship. The next one is the team structure. Again, most of the team structures, the specialized team structures will end up as a component teams, which is on the left side of the diagram. LeSS and Scrum recommends cross-functional feature teams. That means that each item in the product backlog can be executed end to end by a feature team. That's what we recommend. There are pros and cons of the component teams and feature teams, but component team structure fundamentally encourages waterfall mentality. You have a separate release management department, or you have a separate UX department, or you have any separate specialized departments which are not cross-functional. They actually encourage handoffs. And of course, as we know, it creates queues, and you might end up also having variable queues, which are the most harmful queues. That's where, if you are interested in true agility, and if you're interested in delivering highest value to the customer, in that context, cross-functional feature teams are helpful. And I tried capturing the practices in one slide. So on the left side, top hand corner, this is about how typically product backlog refinement happens in a less environment. And on the right top hand corner, it talks about the sprint planning. And at the bottom, I have the sprint reviews and retrospectives. It's not a rocket science. In large team environment, the pattern remains the same. That is, the teams who are self-managing, they identify the representatives, and the representatives will work with the product owner in turn. Once they have a critical understanding of the needs, then they will get back to their teams and they work with the teams. And that's the whole pattern, whether in the product backlog refinement as well. On the top left-hand corner, representatives will work with the product owner and the other representatives. Then either they will do the single product backlog refinement or a multi-team product backlog refinement. In the planning as well, representatives will work with the product owner as part of the part one of the sprint planning. During the part two, they identify the items that they can deliver for the sprint, creating sprint backlog. In the bottom, sprint review retrospective, there is only one sprint review where the product owners and the team work with users and stakeholders to get the feedback, which is part of the inspect adapt cycle of empirical process control. With respect to retrospective, Scrum mostly talks about team retrospective because it's only one team. Since in LeSS we have multiple teams, we have added, apart from team retrospective, an overall retrospective, because we want to ensure that the teams who are making decisions, they are aware of the impact of the decision, what they are making on the rest of the teams. Again, applying some of the ideas from systems thinking, the overall retrospective adds a lot of value to the organization in removing the complexity. As I mentioned during the earlier talk about the technical agility, so we highly recommend these practices. Of course, there could be other good and better practices, but what we found was ideas like spec by example, continuous integration, test-driven development, writing clean code, continuous delivery. Some of these practices are extremely useful in a scaling environment. You can't achieve business agility without the technical agility. So we touch upon these practices as well. Last but not least, the other LeSS framework that I wanted to touch upon was a LeSS Huge. When you're dealing with more than 8 teams, we recommend a LeSS Huge. The whole principle of LeSS Huge is very similar to the LeSS, and the empirical process control is maintained here as well. So we still have product owners, the Scrum Master, and the team. In addition to that, to divide and conquer, the concept of area product owners are introduced. So area product owners are they look after teams of product backlog items, teams of features, we can say, in a simple wording, and they act like mini product owners in that particular area. But we still have only single product owner who is responsible for all the prioritization. But once the prioritization is done, then the area product owners for the particular team will take that item, and in turn they go back to their area, and then they work with their teams. So each area is almost like a less framework that we deal with 2 to 8 teams. So this is less huge. Still, you have sprint planning, sprint review, retrospective. We still recommend the teams to do the coordination. We still recommend cross-functional feature teams, so on and so forth. So all those things will remain the same. Okay.
Venky, Lars here.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
On the previous slide there, where you had POs and area POs, do you have any opinion about who of them owns the customer interface, or have they made customer interface out of the APOs or the POs?
So when we look at the customer interface, of course, the product owner is one of the key person who works with the customer. But this is where we need to wear the hat of a LeSS practitioner here. We need to find out if we don't involve the area product owners in some of the conversation, are we creating a handoff, because handoff is a waste.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to make such decisions to see, to involve the area product owners appropriately, so that we don't pass on the waste to the customer.
So it's a shared responsibility.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm just trying to sell my training here. And yeah, I haven't come up with specific dates for all the trainings yet, but this is something that's going on in my mind as of now. I have put together a few dates, tentative dates that I'm thinking, but of course, if you reach out to me, if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me, and can talk about the training dates. That's it.
Thank you very much, Venky. Has anyone got questions? So I've got one, Venky. Not sure if you'll like this question. Can you tell me the main difference between LeSS and Scaled Agile Framework?
No, I expected this. Actually, I expected at the beginning, not at the end. So yes, a lot of people, of course, in the LeSS training, that's one of the common questions. But incidentally, I have also seen many people don't ask that question at all. That's a very, very interesting thing, because I try to address that question in the beginning of the training itself before someone asks. So it's my opinion, right? So most of the time when people talk about frameworks, they tend to compare the practices. They will try to compare how many roles SAFe has, how many roles LeSS has, or how many roles Spotify has, how many roles DAD has, and so on and so forth. My view is that we should not be comparing framework based on the practices, but we should be fundamentally asking a question: what is our optimizing goal? Your optimizing goal should drive the framework selection decision, rather than the framework, rather than going based on the celebrity endorsement or based on the popularity. Of course, if you just Google around between SAFe and LeSS, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of pages which compare the practices. They have the release train concepts. We don't have that. They have the hardening sprint. We don't have it. And they're purely focusing on Scrum, and there are several other practices and ideas there. There is no good or bad about it, but the fundamental question is, what is optimizing goal? And LeSS specifically calls out that if your organization's optimizing goal is agility and delivering highest value to the customer all the time, then you need to be doing this work in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I typically, when in the training programs, when people ask, or during the conversation as well, I ask them to reflect on what is the optimizing goal of SAFe, and you need to figure it out. What is optimizing goal and how it is relevant to you, whether it suits your optimizing goal. So I always say that it's not about which framework is better, which framework is good, bad. There's no good or bad in the world. Every framework is designed for a specific context. Every framework is designed for a certain optimizing goal. So the question should always be, what is my optimizing goal? And what is the optimizing goal of the framework? And do they match with each other?
Yeah. I think you're actually 100% correct, and you've also been at the same time very diplomatic. So very, very well done. Has anyone got any other questions? Otherwise, I've got a couple. You guys go first. Anyone? Someone's put in the chat. Where's that gone?
I had a quick one, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So in relation to defining the product,
Sorry, who's this?
it's Michael. Sorry. Yeah. So in relation to defining the product, I'm just considering a situation at work, for example, where we have a highly specialized section that has a large team of specialists on it. They have an external facing interface to the end user, but we also effectively have an internal customers that interface to the same users through a much easier web interface. How do you deal with something like that? Do you consider that particular very specialized area to be a separate product, or should you be looking at trying to include people from that area in the cross-functional teams?
It's a very good question. See, this is typically an exercise that I do during the course. One is that we ask a set of questions, and those questions would enable you to define whether they should be included or not included. It's a lengthy exercise, but I'll share the questions. So the first question you need to ask is that, do they serve same set of customers? If they're all serving the same set of customers, then definitely there is a potential for you to make them part of the same product. Because if you want to change, add a feature to the same set of people, or same set of customers, then you will end up replicating in multiple places. I used to work for an organization where they had 10 different products, pretty much doing exactly the same thing for the same set of customers. And we wanted to introduce a new feature that used to impact pretty much the remaining 9. And that's a classic case where trying to make change in one impacting others, specifically from the customer perspective. The second question you need to look at is the technical dependencies. Are they part of a larger product development environment where trying to change one interface impacts the other interface? And if you're frequently doing it, then there is a potential that you can bring them together under the same product umbrella. Probably if you're dealing with more than 8 teams, you can end up having the product owner and different area product owners or different areas within the same product. Third question you need to ask is, why did we end up like this? Is it because the way in which organization is defined? If you're aware of the Conway's law, I'm trying to simplify here. Sometimes when the architectures are deeply involved in the initial stages of product development and organizational design, then the org structure reflects the org structure. The architecture reflects the org structure. So if that is the case, then you will end up having some of these teams being created as a separate end product or separate teams. So that is something that you need to look at as well. So specifically, I would recommend and invite you to think about these questions, ask these questions. And if you also Google around broader and narrow product definitions, and if it links to the LeSS website, these questions are there with specific examples, and you just have to answer that, and it starts giving you pointers to see if they are part of the same product, whether you should involve them or whether you should keep them as separate. Does it work for you?
Yeah, I think so. Might be one I'll talk to you further about later, just out of interest.
Absolutely.
Probably worth getting into specifics, and I'd like to learn more about it. But yeah, that gives a good overview, I think. Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Venky, do you mind sharing the article that you referred in the start? Can Ben?
How does it work, Ian?
What do you want to see the text of? Who was the gentleman? Kent Beck, was it? Is that the one you want to see?
Right. I think my suggestion is the easiest way could be that.
We're going to put the video on YouTube, so you can screenshot it from there, or you can Google it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you reach out to me offline, I can share that article as well. I'm sure it's on available on Google.
I've got one question. Venky, could you go to the screen where you had component teams on the left and feature teams on the right?
Right. Okay. Yes, there you go.
That was it. So the main difference I can see there is that on the left, with component teams, one item on the backlog is going to be worked on by all teams, probably all teams. Whereas on the right, you've got one team working on one item, and they may touch on all components. What do you think about splitting up your architecture so that the components are separate, can be released separately? Now, I'm not thinking component A is a UI and then it's business logic and then database. I'm thinking like your Spotify app, where your search is one component, your sound quality is another one, your recommendations is another one, your library is another component. So they're actual valuable customer features that come together to make a whole application. Right.
I think probably it could be that I'm actually seeing that it could be the terminology. We might be using, for me, search is a feature rather than a component. So how feature is defined is something that is delivering value to the customer. If the search functionality is delivering value to the customer, and if you are able to, if you have a cross-functional feature team who are able to build that search functionality end to end and deliver it to the customer, I think that's what I call it as a feature team, and I think you are referring to the same as component. Yeah. Okay. It's just earlier we were talking about components as layers. I get it now. Mostly the architecture layer, centralized units. See, the key problem, even though, of course, it's very obvious that the component teams leads to a handoff. The bigger dysfunction associated with component team is their behavior towards customers. Because component teams are specialized and incentivized to be pro in their own area. For them, becoming experts in their area becomes their key priority rather than serving the customer. In case of feature team, your language itself is around how do I deliver customer-centric feature to the customer? How do I deliver value to the customer? So that is the most powerful concept here that we should look at. Apart from looking at some of the wastes and the dysfunctions associated with it. Again, I want to reiterate that there's no right or wrong. Component teams are needed and they work well when the optimizing goal is not agility, when your optimizing goal is efficiency of that particular team, then I think you should design and go ahead with component teams. But when your optimizing goal is agility and delivering the highest value to the customer, in those contexts, component team becomes painful.
Mm-hmm.
On the technical side of that, it sounds like part of what you're referring to there, Ian, may have been like microservice architecture type design, where you're still, depending on the level it's taken to, you're still allowed to have interdependencies between the different microservices. But they effectively become a feature. Each microservice is then a feature. In terms of the code side of things, your best practices means you can then have them completely separate so that they don't impact each other. But that's probably another more technical discussion. But it sounds like that very much aligns with the feature versus component, where the terms could be interchanged by someone who's not familiar with the framework, but they have a very different meaning for the same terms.
I think the point where that breaks down is when the feature the customer needs goes across what you're calling these these components. So if you now have two teams to work on part of the micro service architecture, and these two teams to deliver the feature to the customer, you now have these dependencies. So I think it very much, if you can deliver the one feature through one of the teams, that's fine. But as soon as it goes across two teams, then you've built some dependencies between the teams to the customer to get their value.
Yeah, you're right. What you've got to think about is the worst cases where you have a monolith and everything's connected. So by dividing it up, you reduce that. So if you've got two teams that have to be involved, then it's not perfect, but it's better than having all teams connected with the same code.
And I think Spotify themselves, when they were in Perth, they were talking about this, and they actually saw like their teams where they were specialized for different parts of the Spotify app. That was actually something that they were talking about trying to change, because it could be a sub-optimization where now, one team that focuses on one part of the player is working on something that's less valuable than needs to be done, but the team that is focused on that bit is busy. So it wasn't a perfect model for them.
Yeah.
Yes, Steve?
So it is now 10:20. Shall we ask one more question and then we'll wrap it up?
I think there was one in text, if you'd like to grab that one, Ian.
Where's that? Sorry, I might be working. You have mentioned self-managing teams a few times. However, it is my understanding that Scrum promotes self-organizing teams. Are you stating that LeSS is promoting teams to self-managing?
Right.
Or are you using the terms interchangeably?
I think yes, Scrum uses the word self-organizing, and in LeSS we consciously use the word self-managing. I think the concept of self-organizing in the context of the product development is not clearly defined. Each and every one is trying to define in their own way. But we found that Richard Hackman, have you heard of Richard Hackman's work? Leading teams. So based on his research, he has come up with a clear definition of what self-managing team is all about. And we prefer to use the word self-managing, which has a clear definition, rather than self-organizing, which has an unclear definition. Yeah, I again, if you want to know more, Google authority metrics, and you will find the definition, and that's what we are using.
I actually quite like the term, because it means you don't necessarily have to have managers involved. And I like the idea of giving managers a role of coaching and being aware of how people are doing, and sort of, giving them something to do, which is more useful than pushing them to hurry up and finish on this deadline type thing. All right, so any last burning questions? One more, otherwise we'll finish up. All right, on behalf of everyone, thank you, Venky, very interesting. I will put this up on YouTube in the next few days. But we'll finish up now. Just everybody say thanks to Venky, and we'll see you next time. Thanks Venky.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and thank you all. Thanks, Michael, Steve, Daniel, all for waking up, staying so late. All right.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ian.
Cheers.
Bye.
Ta-da.